For before this consent, they were unengaged as to common order of government, none of the community having any legal claim to sovereignty more than the rest. When, therefore, they were forced to conclude upon association for their mutual preservation, they must be thought to act rationally, and not to make their condition worse, but rather better by that conclusion. And if they found it worse, to resume their radical right, which they had conferred upon men subject to law, not to tyrannize over them. And in this case, certainly they had the power of choosing what kind of government suited most to their advantage, and would best preserve their liberties, and how far this should be extended, and who should be assumed into this combination. Still, with a reservation of the privilege to their own safety, in their associates should not do their duty. And so they might also reserve to themselves a liberty to alter the form, when they found it productive of more prejudice than advantage, and never to leave their condition remediless, and to pitch upon this way of succession, and not another, the way of free election of every successor, or of definite election limited to one line, or to the nearest in line, and a contra, with a reserve still of their primitive privileges, to secure themselves from the inconveniences of that determination, or to change it, and to make choice of such a family and line, and not another, and whether the eldest always of that family, or the fittest of it is to be chosen, and however it be, yet still by the people's consent. And in all this to have respect to some good, great, and necessary ends, which, if they should be disappointed of, and find these means useless or destructive too, they were to be loosed from their obligation to use or to own them. See Jus Populi Vindicative, chapter 5, page 80, etc. Secondly, if we consider how nature determines the people's interest in the constitution of governors, whence it comes that this man and not that man, this race and family and not that, is invested with that title, it will be found that there is no title on earth now to the crowns, to families, to persons, but to the people's suffrage. For the institution of magistracy in general does not make James Stuart a king, no more than John Chamberlain. Neither do qualifications make one, otherwise there might be many better than is this day extant. For there are many men better qualified, and there is no prophetical or immediate callings to kingdoms now. And as for conquest without consent, and having no more for a title, it is no better than royal latrociny. It is certain God would not command us to obey kings, and leave us in the dark, that we should not know him that hath a real call to it. And if we have not the people's call, where shall we find another? It remains, therefore, they must have it from the people, who have it to give radically and virtually, having a power to preserve themselves, and to put it in the hands of one or more rulers, that they may preserve themselves by them. All men are born alike as to civil power, no man being born with a crown on his head. And yet men united in society may give it to this man and not to that man. Therefore they must have it virtually, for they cannot give what they have not. And as cities have power to choose their magistrates, so many cities have power to create an universal ruler over them all. The people also have power to limit the magistrate's power with conditions, so that the present ruler shall not have so much prerogative as his predecessor, as royalists cannot deny. Therefore, they must have given that power, which they can limit. See Lex Rex, question 4, page 10, etc. Secondly, the Scripture also gives light in this particular. First, in giving directions and rules about their orderly calling their governors, empowering them to, quote, take wise men and understanding, and known among their tribes to be made rulers, unquote, Deuteronomy 1, verse 13. Quote, to make judges and officers in all their gates, unquote, Deuteronomy 16, verse 18. Quote, to set one among their brethren, king over them and not a stranger, unquote, Deuteronomy 17, verse 15. To what purpose are these rulers given them, if they had no interest to choose their magistrates? Would God command them to set a king over them if they had not power to do it? And to set such a man over them, and not such an one, if they had no influence in making one at all? And accordingly, that wise statist says very well, 2 Samuel 16, verse 18. Hushai to Absalom, nay, but whom the Lord and his people and all the men of Israel choose, his will I be, and with him will I abide. Which will also hold in the negative, whom the Lord and the people and all the men of the kingdom do not choose, his will we not be, nor with him will we abide. Second, the Scripture expressly attributed the making of kings to the people. All the people of Judah took Azariah and made him king, instead of his father Amaziah, whom they had executed. 2 Kings 14, verse 21. They came with a perfect heart to make David king in Hebron, 1 Chronicles 12, verse 38. So they made Joash king, 2 Chronicles 23, verse 11. Third, even these that were particularly designed of God and chosen to be rulers, yet were not formally invested with power, before the people conferred it upon them. Gideon was called of God to it, but was not judged, till the people said, Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son, giving him an hereditary right for his children. Judges 8, verse 12. Saul was appointed to be king, and therefore Samuel honored him, because he was marked out of God to be king. 1 Samuel 9, verse 24. And anointed him with oil. 1 Samuel 10, verse 1. After this he was gifted and qualified for government. God gave him another heart. Verse 9. Yet all this did not make him king till the people met for his inauguration. Verse 17, etc. And crowned him, and made him king in Gilgal. 1 Samuel 11, last verse. David was anointed by Samuel, and yet was a persecuted fugitive for several years, and never acknowledged formally king, till the men of Judah came and anointed him. 2 Samuel 2, verse 4. For if he had been king before, then there were 2 kings in Israel at one time, and David failed of his royal duty in not punishing the murderer Saul, whereas himself says he would not touch the Lord's anointed. Therefore the people made all kings, and that by choice and consent, without which they were no kings. Hence I argue, if the consent and choice of the people be so essentially necessary to the making of kings, then they who set up themselves against the consent of the body of the land, and without the choice of any, must be usurpers, not to be acknowledged for lawful kings. But the former is true, as is proven above. Therefore, now plain it is, that this duke set up himself against the consent of the body, being excluded from the government by the representatives of England, and generally hated of all, who, disdaining to wait upon the formal choice of any, but after he had paved his passage to the throne upon his brother's blood, did usurp the title without all law. Fifth, the second thing necessary for the legal constitution of a king by the people is their compact with him. They must either be express or tacit, explicit or implicit. 2 things here are to be proven, that will furnish an argument for disowning both the brothers. First, that there must be a conditional reciprocally obliging covenant between the sovereign and the subjects, without which there is no relation to be owned. Secondly, that when this compact is broken in all or its chiefest conditions by the sovereign, the people's obligation ceases. The first I shall set down in the words of a famous author, our renowned countryman Buchanan, in his dialogue, quote, De jure regino ipud scatos. There is then, or there ought to be, a mutual compact between the king and his subjects, unquote. That this is indispensably necessary and essential to the make-up of the relation of sovereign and subjects may be proved both from the light of nature and revelation. First, it may appear from the light of nature, from the light of natural reason. Number 1, from the rise of government and the interest people have in erecting it by consent and choice, as is showed above. If a king cannot be without the people's making, then all the power he hath must either be by compact or gift. If by compact, then we have what we proposed, and if by gift, then is abused, they may recall it. Or, if they cannot recover it, yet they may and ought to hold their hand, and give him no more, that they may retain, that is, no more honor or respect, which is in the honorer before the honored get it. Can it be imagined that a people acting rationally would give a power absolutely, without restrictions, to destroy all their own rights? Could they suppose this boundless and lawless creature, left at liberty to tyrannize, would be a fit mean to procure the ends of government? For this were to set up a rampant tyrant to rule as he listeth, which would make their condition a great deal worse than if they had no ruler at all. For then they might have more liberty to see to their safety. See Just Populi, chapter 9, pages 96 and 97. Second, this will be clear from the nature of that authority which only a sovereign can have over his subjects, which, whatever be the nature of it, it cannot be absolute. That is against Scripture, nature, and common sense, as shall be proven at more length. That is to set up a tyrant, one who is free from all conditions, a roaring lion and a raging beast, who destroy all if he pleases. It must be granted by all that the sovereign authority is only fiduciary, entrusted by God and the people with a great charge. A great pledge is impawned and committed to the care and custody of the magistrate, which he must take special care of, and not abuse or waste or alienate or sell. For in that case royalists themselves grant he may be disposed. deposed. He is by office a patron of the subject's liberty and a keeper of the law both of God and man, the keeper of both tables. Sure, he hath no power over the laws of God, but a ministerial power. He may not stop and disable them as he pleases. Of the same nature is it over all other parts of his charge. He is rather a tutor than an inheritor and proprietor of the commonwealth, and may not do what his pupils interest, what he pleases. In a word, the nature and whole significancy of his power lies in this, that he is the nation's public servant, both objectively in that he is only for the good of the people, and representatively in that the people hath impawned in his hand all their power to do royal service. The Scripture teaches this, in giving him the titles of service as watchman, etc., allowing him royal wages for his royal work, Romans 13. He is God's minister, attending continually to this thing. There is his work. For this cause pay you tribute also. There is his wages and maintenance. He is so called in that transaction with Rehoboam. The old men advised him to be a servant unto the people. Then they should be his servants. 1 Kings 12, verse 7. There was a conditional bargain proposed, as to be a servant or tutor or guardian upon trust always implies conditions and accountableness to them that entrust them. Third, it must needs be so, otherwise great absurdities would follow. Here would be a voluntary contracted relation, obliging us to relative duties to a man that owed none correlative to us, and yet one whom we set over us. It were strange if there were no condition here, and no other voluntarily suscepted relations can be without this, as between man and wife, master and servant, etc. This would give him the disposal of us and ours, as if both we and that and what we have were his own, as a man's goods are, against which he does not sin whatever he doth with them. And this would make a king that could not sin against us, being no ways obliged to us, for he can no otherwise be obliged to us, but upon covenant conditions. He may be obliged and bound in duty to God otherwise, but he cannot be bound to us otherwise. And if he be not bound, then he may do what he will. He can do no wrong to us to whom he is no ways bound. This also is point blank against the law of God, which is the second way to prove it, by the light of revelation or Scripture. First, in the very directions about making and setting up of kings, the Lord shows what conditions shall be required of them. Deuteronomy 17:15. And in all directions for obeying them and qualifications they should have rehearsed, as in Romans 12, verses 3 and 4. Therefore none are to be set up but on these conditions, and none are to be obeyed but such as have these qualifications. Number 2. In his promises of the succession of kings, he secures their continuation only conditionally to establish the kingdom, if they be constant to do his commandments and judgments. 1 Chronicles 28, verse 7. There shall not fail a man to sit upon the throne, yet so that they take heed to their way to walk in God's law, as David did. 2 Chronicles 6, verse 16. Now he was not otherwise to perform these promises, but by the action and suffrage of the people setting him up, which he had appointed to be the way of calling kings to thrones. If therefore the Lord's promise be conditional, the people's actions also behoove to be suspended upon the same conditions. Third, we have many express covenants between rulers and subjects in Scripture. Jephthah was fetched from the land of Tob, and made the head of the Gileadites by an explicit mutual stipulation, wherein the Lord was invocated as a witness. Judges 11, verse 6, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So all the elders of Israel came to make David king, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and then they anointed him king over Israel. 2 Samuel 5, verse 3. He made there a covenant with them before the Lord. 1 Chronicles 11, verse 3.